A reading from the Holy Gospel according to St. Luke. Each year, Jesus' parents went to Jerusalem for the feast of Passover. And when he was 12 years old, they went up according to festival custom. After they had completed its days, as they were returning, the boy Jesus remained behind in Jerusalem, but his parents did not know it. Thinking that he was in the caravan, they journeyed for a day and looked for him among their relatives and acquaintances. But not finding him, they returned to Jerusalem to look for him. After 3 days, they found him in the temple, sitting in the midst of the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. And all who had heard him were astounded at his understanding and his answers. When his parents saw him, they were astonished, and his mother said to him, "Son, why have you done this to us? Your father and I have been looking for you with great anxiety." And he said to them, "Why were you looking for me? Did you not know that I must be in my Father's house?" But they did not understand what he said to them. He went down with them and came to Nazareth, and was obedient to them. And his mother kept all these things in her heart. And Jesus advanced in wisdom and age and favor before God and man. The Gospel of the Lord. In our Catholic tradition, the Sunday between Christmas and New Year's is dedicated to the Holy Family. So today we celebrate the Feast of the Holy Family. In our Gospel passage, we have matter of fact, the only story of Jesus' childhood, other than what happened at Christmas. So our dear Lord is about 12 years old here. But this is an important passage, first of all, because it does give us a little glimpse to who Jesus is. So we have, first of all, a little meditation from Pope Benedict in his book on the infancy narratives, just released before Christmas. And the Pope meditates just a little bit about the answer that Jesus gives to his parents upon being found. He says, "The answer of the 12-year-old made it clear that he knew the Father, God, intimately. Only he knows God, not merely through the testimony of men, but he recognizes him in himself. Jesus stands before the Father as Son on familiar terms. He lives in his presence. He sees him, and yet it is also true that his wisdom grows. As a human being, he does not live in some abstract omniscience, but he is rooted in concrete history, a place in time, in the different phases of human life. And this is what gives concrete shape to his knowledge. So it emerges clearly here that he thought and learned in human fashion. So the important point, especially given our Christmas celebration just a few days ago, is that Jesus, true God, one in being with the Father, entered this world becoming also true man. But we also see how there's this mysterious dynamic between his divine and human natures. He has the knowledge of God, that intimate knowledge of the Father. But then in that human nature, just like us, he has to learn. How to learn? Well, I don't know what happened. Did I preach heresy? How to learn how to walk and talk and things like that. But the other point that we have in this gospel passage is an importance of our family life. We find the Holy Family doing their duty. They've gone down to Jerusalem as prescribed by the Torah to celebrate Passover. Then they leave. Now, it was common practice that, let's say, all the neighbors, the relatives, the friends from Nazareth would have gone down together, and then they would have returned. They would have returned home like in a big caravan. And I don't know what's happening with the sound system. Maybe the angels are telling me something. So, anyway, they would have returned home, and just like at some of your neighborhood Christmas parties, the men seem to gather together, the women seem to gather together, and so on. Well, the children would have stayed mostly with the moms. But Jesus, being 12 years old now, most likely would have been with the men. So he would have been associating with the men. So no wonder St. Joseph thought, well, Jesus must be with Mary. Mary must have thought, well, Jesus must be with Joseph. And then at the end of the day, on their first journey back, maybe having gone 15, 20 miles, they realize, where's Jesus? Imagine the panic. Now you all, if you're parents, you may have had this experience when all of a sudden in the grocery store or the department store, you realize, where's little Johnny? Where's little Susie? And this panic ensues. So Mary and Joseph rush back to Jerusalem, but that takes a whole nother day in itself. And then the third day, they find Jesus in the temple where he belongs with the Father. But what do we learn from this about our own family life? Because after all, my brothers and sisters, we're called to have holy families. That a Christian family is meant to be a holy family. In one way modeled after the divine love of the Trinity. That Trinity of three divine persons, one God, bound together in a faithful, self-giving love. Also the love that we see reflected in the love of Mary, Joseph, and Jesus. After all, when Jesus entered this world, God deigned that he should live in the context of the human family, with a human marriage between Joseph and Mary. So we learn from them. So what's the importance here? Well, for you all who are parents, or any of you who are entrusted with the care of children, I well know you want what's best for your children. You want to provide a safe, secure home, the opportunities of life, a good education, and so on. But the greatest task and the hardest task that you have in our world today is to guard their souls, because it would so easily happen that your children could become lost. Yes, lost to the things of this world. We live in an increasingly isolated society. So many children that I know have in their own little bedroom, and that's a luxury in itself, their own room, a computer, a cell phone, a television. Who needs other people when you think about it? So many of our kids could spend their whole lives isolated, lost to the rest of the family. I was at a restaurant this past fall with my mom and her good friend, Mrs. Grundy, down the street. And we were enjoying our meal. Next to us was this table. And they had the two parents. There were two sets of grandparents. There were the three children, about middle school, high school age. So 3 children, 3 grandchildren. I thought, what a wonderful opportunity. Here you have 3 generations able to talk, converse, interact. Well, what were the 3 kids doing? Thumb exercises the whole time on their cell phones. And I'm like, what is wrong here? Maybe they're texting their friends, maybe they're texting each other, who knows? But lost to the rest of the family. How tragic that is. And so we have this losing of that intergenerational contact. But while cell phones are just a device, you parents have to know, who are they texting? What are they texting? I've heard of cases where children are put to bed and then they receive the text in the middle of the night. They sneak out. And then they go to the party. And then the party mutates into this huge extravaganza, all because of texting. Do you know what your kids are texting? Or many of our children have Facebook. Nothing necessarily wrong with that, but do you know what's on it? That's the key. Do you know who the friends are? Because we do hear reports of predators using Facebook, But it also shows from a survey from the California State University that 30% of kids posted bad pictures, risque pictures of themselves on Facebook. 16% pictures with alcohol or drug paraphernalia. 50% had profanity on their Facebook page. Do you know what's on your kid's Facebook page? And then what about the violent video games? We've heard about the awful shootings up in Connecticut, but remember back in 1999, we had the Columbine shootings. And it seems like it's just a regular event anymore, shootings in our schools. Have we ever wondered that almost a generation now has been raised with extremely violent video games? Have we raised a generation, really lost a generation, that they've become murderers without any conscience behind what they are doing? While we may talk a lot about gun control laws and so on, maybe the entertainment business ought to take credit for what they've done to our children and do something about that. Then we could go on with the internet. It's the greatest purveyor of pornography. Do we know what our kids are doing? Not much research has been done, except that we do know that as early as 8 years of age, children are now watching pornographic pictures through the internet. Think of that. Do you know what your children are doing as they surf the web? Again, none of these things in themselves are bad, Facebook, cell phone, and so on, but they can be used for great evil, and we can lose a child in the process. We should remember how prevalent this is. The Kaiser Foundation in 2009 did a survey which replicated a study done 5 years earlier, and it found that children between age 8 and 18 spent 7.5 hours using technology not related to any school activity at all, just on their own. 4.5 hours of that was on the computer, 2.5 hours on, or television was 4.5 hours, the computer was 2.5 hours, video games 1.25 hours, and reading was 20 minutes. Go figure. 71% of kids have a television in their bedroom, and 64% of families watch TV during dinner time. Well, my brothers and sisters, an isolated society. And when society becomes isolated, and our families become fragmented, so that we're just people living under the same roof, rather than being a family with that interaction, we're going to lose our children. So what do? We have to create a holy family. We have to keep our eyes focused on God's plan, as revealed so well by Mary, Joseph, and Jesus. So, first step is, and this is good to remember as we're living the year of faith this year, as we're approaching a new year. First step is, look at ourselves. You and I, as members of families, have to be looking at ourselves and thinking about, am I giving the best person I can? So in our prayers, we look to the example, if you're a man, to St. Joseph, if you're a woman, to our Blessed Mother, and think, am I living those virtues that St. Paul speaks of, the kindness, compassion, humility, gentleness, patience, forgiveness, and so on? Do I live that way? Part of the prayer then is, am I giving the best I can to my spouse? So am I being the best husband, the best wife? Pray for your spouse each day. Pray for your marriage. It takes God's grace to have a good marriage. Then, am I the best father, the best mother? Am I giving what I need to each of my children? Pray for each child. Each child is different. Pray for the grace to understand how to deal with each child. And then, too, we have to pray with gratitude. I think one of the great problems in our families today is families are always looking across the street to what other people have, and then thinking, what's wrong with my family? No. Think about your family. Be grateful for what you have. Your family is essential. And then you pray about the priorities. God comes first, then the marriage, then the kids, and everything else. When we flip the priorities, get ready, problems occur. So this is the first step that we need to take. Again, as we're closing this year, almost a new year of faith, Feast of the Holy Family, look at your family and the person that you give to your family. The next step, then, especially for you parents, work to make your family holy. Part of this is create an environment. So, the Holy Father and his predecessors have always referred to the home as like the domestic church. Your home needs to be a sanctuary. It needs to be God's space. And this is why just the environment is important. When you walk in, you ought to see a crucifix. There should be religious artwork throughout the house, a crucifix over each bed. Very important. Second step, you need to pray with your family. As a father especially, lead your family in prayer. That was St. Joseph's job. Whether it's grace at meals, bedtime prayers, it's saying the family rosary, going to Mass as a family as best that you can, always take time to pray. The Family Research Council did a study, and they found, just like other surveys, that 50% of marriages in America end in divorce in 5 years. That is tragic. However, if a couple, a family, goes to church each week, it drops to 10%. If they pray together each day, it drops to 5%. And if they don't contracept, less than 1%. Why? God is present in their family and in their marriage. Then, too, teach your children. You need to teach them the faith. I can't do it by myself. You need to help them with that religious ed homework, just as you do with history projects, math projects, whatever projects it may be. It's good for the parent. It helps you know your faith better. It's good for the child because then the child knows you're interested. St. Joseph taught Jesus. That was his job as a father. He taught Jesus how to read, to write. He taught him the Torah. How important it is for you dads then, not just to be coaches. You have to be teachers to your children of the faith. And with that, with the older children especially, to teach them. Moms and dads, who's going to teach your young people, especially when they're in middle school, high school, about the things of life that we need to know if you aren't going to do it? You don't want them just to learn from their friends or from the media or from their teachers in public school. The next step is talk with them. Dinner time is so important. It's a family gathering to talk, to share that meal, to be relaxed. You can find out so much just by sharing that meal. So often in our world today, families don't eat together anymore. They're here, there, everywhere, and they don't eat together. Yet the University of Michigan study showed that when families eat together at least 4 or 5 times a week, there's a significant decrease in divorce, alcohol and drug usage, high school dropout, and teenage pregnancy. It's because they're working together as a family. I know it's not always easy. I have a friend who owns a restaurant. So he works nights. It's a tough life. So what do they do as a family? They all get up, they have breakfast together, and he cooks. When it's not school time, then they have lunch together too. When he comes home from work, they have dessert together. But they're gathering around a table and they're sharing life as a family. And then too, you have to remind them of sin. Sin and its consequences. I always knew I had a healthy respect, a healthy fear of God. God was God. And I also feared mortal sin. I did not want to end up in hell. It's a good, healthy spirituality, actually. Yes, we have a God who loves us, but let's face it, we could commit an awful sin that could cost us to lose our soul. Don't let your children lose their souls. You have to instill in them that sense that God is God, that mortal sin has its consequences. I have to admit that at times, especially when I was in college, having that healthy sense of the respect for God, mortal sin, and so on, kept me from making some pretty bad mistakes. So it's good for your children to know this. King St. Louis of France wrote to his son, and he said, "My dearest son, my first instruction is that you should love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your strength. Without this there is no salvation. Keep yourself, my son, from everything that you know displeases God, that is to say, from every mortal sin. You should permit yourself to be tormented by every kind of martyrdom before you would allow yourself to commit a mortal sin." Good advice. Take to heart these little precepts and think, how can we do better in our own family? The last step to all this is respect the father. Fathers sometimes are really forgotten in our world today. They're also humiliated. I think of that awful little Cox TV commercial talking about bundling, and the father is a total nitwit. If I had Cox, I would cancel it, and I'm never going to buy Cox TV because of that commercial. But so oftentimes fathers are made to look like nitwits, dummies. No, St. Joseph was well respected by Mary and little Jesus. He has an important role. He's a righteous man. The Heavenly Father chose him. Well, dads, you have an important role. And wives and children, you ought to respect good old dad. Quite frankly, fathers, you need to be sure you are teaching your kids. They need to see you on your knees, standing in the confessional line, praying here at Mass. They need to see that. An interesting Swiss study showed that when fathers practice the faith, meaning going to church every Sunday, no matter what mom does, so remove mom from the equation, when fathers practice their faith, 75% of the time, children will continue to practice the faith when they're adults. When fathers don't practice the faith, 15% of the children will practice the faith as adults. Big difference. Dads, you're essential. So my brothers and sisters, a reflection on the Holy Family. Take it to heart and think, how can I make my family more holy, looking to the example of Joseph, Mary, and our Savior, Jesus Christ. May God bless you.